The silence of the suburbs is a lie. It's a manufactured piece, bought with overpriced mulch and the illusion of safety. As I stood in the dark behind those manicured hedges, listening to a local tyrant and a hired thug plot a murder over industrial-grade toxic waste, the illusion didn't just break, it shattered into a million jagged pieces. I looked at Tracy. In the pale glow of the clubhouse security lights, she didn't look like the woman I'd shared coffee with that morning. Her face was a mask of cold, tactical geometry. She wasn't scared, she was calculating. "We have enough," I breathed, the earbuds still buzzing with Brad's gravelly boasts about his ghost gun. "We call the police, now." Tracy didn't move, she just watched the window. "No, not yet." "Tracy, he has an untraceable weapon," I hissed, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "He just threatened to kill me." "And who do you think the local police are going to believe, Mark?" She finally turned to me, her voice a calm, chilling whisper. "Linda has been the HOA president for 10 years. She plays golf with the chief of police. She has the paper trail. Right now, we're just two residents trespassing at 2:00 a.m. We don't just need a recording. We need a confrontation they can't lie their way out of." She signaled for us to move. We retreated back into the shadows of the greenbelt, slipping through the grass like ghosts. By the time we reached our back door, my adrenaline had peaked and crashed, leaving me hollow. Tracy, however, went straight to the kitchen. She didn't go for a weapon. She went for her laptop and a glass of water. "Go to sleep, Mark," she said, her fingers already dancing across the keys. "The performance starts at dawn." I didn't sleep. I sat in the darkened living room, watching the street. At 6:45 a.m., the sun began to bleed over the horizon, casting long, menacing shadows across the cul-de-sac. At 7:00 a.m. sharp, a matte black SUV pulled into our driveway. Brad didn't even pretend to be professional this time. He slammed the car door, the sound echoing through the quiet street like a gunshot. He was wearing the full tactical vest again, but this time, he'd added a pair of dark aviators and a pair of hard-knuckle gloves. He walked up our path with the heavy, arrogant gait of a man who believed he owned the ground he walked on. Thump, thump, thump. The door groaned under his fist. I looked at Tracy. She was standing in the hallway, wearing a simple white blouse and slacks, the picture of a cooperative, slightly tired homeowner. She looked at me and gave a tiny, imperceptible nod. I opened the door. "The key," Brad barked. He didn't say hello. He didn't cite a bylaw. He just stood there, his hand resting openly on the grip of the pistol tucked into his waistband. The threat was no longer veiled. It was the centerpiece of the conversation. "Good morning, Brad," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I'd spent the last 4 hours rehearsing this. "You're early. We were just finishing breakfast." "I don't care about your breakfast," he spat, stepping over the threshold before I could invite him in. He was sweating despite the morning chill, his eyes darting around the entryway. "The audit is happening now. Give me the spare key, or I'm authorizing a forced entry for emergency maintenance. Your choice, Mark. Make it a quick one." Tracy stepped forward, her hands visible and empty. "We've decided to cooperate, Brad. We realize that safety is, as Linda says, a family affair." Brad's lips curled into a smirk. He looked at me, then at her, his ego swelling. "Smart girl. I knew you'd see reason once you realized who's in charge. Now the key." Tracy reached into her pocket and pulled out a single silver key on a plain ring. She held it out, but as Brad reached for it, she let it slip. It clattered onto the hardwood floor, sliding toward the wall, specifically toward the electrical outlet where the whistling draft lived. "Oops," she murmured. Brad growled, a low, animal sound of frustration. He knelt down, his tactical vest bunching up around his neck, his heavy frame making the floorboards complain. As he reached for the key, Tracy spoke, her voice dropping that mask of sweetness for something sharp and surgical. "While you're down there, Brad, you might notice the draft. It's asbestos, isn't it?" The man froze. He was hunched over, his hand inches from the key, and for a 3-second stretch, the entire house went deathly silent. He didn't move a muscle. Then, very slowly, he stood up. His face wasn't red anymore. It was a sickly, mottled purple. "What did you say?" he whispered. "The insulation," Tracy continued, leaning casually against the doorframe. I stepped back, giving her the floor. "The industrial-grade toxic waste you and Linda used to skim $2 million off the construction budget. It's a federal crime, Brad. Racketeering, environmental endangerment, fraud. I imagine the EPA is going to have a field day with the samples I sent out via courier at 5:00 a.m. Brad's hand went to his hip. His fingers closed around the grip of the ghost gun. "You think you're so smart," he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and genuine terror. "You think you can just talk your way out of this. You have no idea the kind of people you're dealing with." "I think I'm dealing with a man who is currently being recorded by 4 hidden cameras," Tracy said, pointing a thumb toward the ceiling. And I think I'm dealing with a man whose boss, Linda, is currently being detained in the clubhouse by two very real state investigators who found the recordings we made last night. That was the lie. We hadn't called the state investigators, yet we'd called the city building inspector and the local news. But Brad didn't know that. He was a bully, and bullies are built on a foundation of fragile glass. "You're lying," Brad roared. He pulled the gun. I felt the air leave my lungs. The barrel of the black, jagged pistol was pointed directly at Tracy's chest. This was it, the moment where the suburban dream turned into a crime scene. "Give me the recording," Brad screamed, his eyes wide and wild. "Give me the phone, give me the laptop, or I swear to God, I'll end this right now." Tracy didn't flinch, she didn't scream, she didn't even blink. She just looked at him with a pitying sort of boredom. "Brad," she said softly, "you're standing flat-footed again." In one fluid, violent motion, Tracy moved. It was a blur of white fabric and calculated physics. She didn't move away from the gun, she moved into his space. Her left hand parried the barrel upward, the metal clicking against her wedding ring, while her right palm slammed into the base of Brad's chin. The sound was sickening, the snap of a jaw closing, and the heavy oomph of air being knocked out of a man twice her size. Before he could recover, she seized his wrist, twisted it with a mechanical cruelty, and the ghost gun clattered to the floor. She didn't stop, she swept his lead leg, and the 230-pound security officer hit the hardwood like a sack of wet cement. Within seconds, she had his arm pinned behind his back, her knee pressed firmly into the nerve cluster behind his ear. "Mark," she said, her breathing only slightly elevated, "call the actual police now, and tell them to bring a hazmat team." 10 minutes later, the cul-de-sac was a sea of blue and red lights. But it wasn't just the police. Two white vans with Channel 4 News on the side had pulled up, their cameras already rolling. I stood on the porch, watching as the real officers hauled Brad out in zip ties. He looked pathetic without his tactical posturing, just a middle-aged man in a cheap vest, crying about his wrist. And then there was Linda. She arrived in her pristine Mercedes, likely tipped off by a neighbor. She stepped out, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her HOA president smile firmly in place. She saw the police, she saw the news cameras, and for a moment she tried to play the part. "Officer," she called out, her voice high and fluttering. "Thank goodness you're here. This man, Brad, he's been acting on his own. I had no idea he was harassing the residents. I've been trying to fire him for weeks." The lead officer, a veteran with a face like granite, didn't even look at her. He just turned his body cam toward her and held up a tablet. On the screen was the crystal clear recording from the clubhouse, Linda's voice, sharp and cold, talking about federal prison and $2 million in stolen funds. The color drained from Linda's face so fast I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked at the police, then at the news cameras, and finally her eyes landed on us. Tracy was standing next to me, a cup of tea in her hand. She didn't look triumphant, she just looked observant. "Linda," Tracy called out over the noise of the sirens. The HOA president looked at her, her eyes wide with a desperate, trapped animal glare. "The city inspector just arrived at the model home," Tracy said, her voice carrying easily across the lawn. "I told him exactly where to drill the test holes. I think you're going to need a very good lawyer, or maybe just a very good cellmate." Linda didn't say a word. She was handcuffed right there in front of the neighbors she had spent a decade terrorizing. As they led her away, she tripped on her own designer heels, a final, graceless fall from a throne made of asbestos and lies. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The HOA was dissolved within a month. The construction company was sued into oblivion, and a state-funded remediation team spent the next year stripping the toxic insulation out of every house in the development, paid for by the seized assets of Linda and her co-conspirators. Peace finally returned to our street, but it was a different kind of peace. It wasn't the forced, artificial quiet of a managed community. It was the real, messy, honest silence of people who finally knew who lived next door. A few weeks after the trials, I was sitting on the porch with Tracy. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. "You know," I said, looking at her, "I never asked where you learned to do that. The move with the gun, the clinical detachment. You're a high school librarian, Tracy." She took a sip of her tea and looked out at the street, a small, sarcastic smirk playing on her lips. "Mark," she said quietly, "everyone has a history. Some people just use theirs to build walls. I used mine to make sure nobody ever gets over them." She stood up, patting my hand. "Now let's go inside. We have a pot roast to finish." I followed her, looking back one last time at the spot where Brad had stood. The suburbs are quiet again, and as long as Tracy is here, I know they'll stay that way. The HOA thought they were the wolves. They thought we were the sheep, but they made the one mistake no predator can survive. They forgot to check who was actually guarding the flock.